This week on Dangerous Tides, we're going to look at a different portion of the world that has over 6,000 shipwrecks and an estimated 30,000 lives lost. Despite the area's name, the waters that are set here act more like the ocean surrounding the North American continent than they would any smaller bodies of water. From famous ships such as the Edmund Fitzgerald to lesser-known wrecks from the 1700s, this is the Great Lakes. Step aboard as we begin to sail on Dangerous Tides. The SS Kamloops was built in 1924 at Furris Shipbuilding Company Limited, a shipbuilder that was founded nearing the end of the First World War in Haverton Hills, Stockton-on-Tees, England, for the Steamships Limited Company in Canada. At a length of 250 feet and a weight of 2,402 tons, the freighter was considered small for the operational standards of the Great Lakes at the time. The size was purposeful, however, as the ship was meant to fit through the Welland Canal system between the St. Lawrence Seaway and the Great Lakes Waterway. The Welland Canal started on Port Weller in Lake Ontario and ended at Port Colborne in Lake Erie. Her primary function was to carry package freight, but she could also carry bulk cargo if needed. On July 5th of that year, she completed her sea testing by being shipped to Copenhagen, Denmark to pick up a cargo of pebbles, which was then taken to Montreal and Houghton, Michigan, for mining companies to use. Upon arrival, the crew would be replaced by lake sailors who knew the area well enough to carry out her duties. The Kamloops would then pass from Port Colborne onto the Welland Canal for the very first time on September 22nd. The first Great Lakes season would set the standard for the Kamloops, whose owners would push the freighter to operate for as long as possible every season. The ship weathered a particularly severe storm that is believed to have sank a vessel near Eagle Harbor on the Kinawa Peninsula. The storm had winds of 50 to 60 miles an hour, with water temperatures at -6 degrees Fahrenheit. After the storm, the Kamloops, along with her sister ship, the Lethbridge, the Mainland Prince, and the Midland King, were reported to be downbound in Lake Superior, while other vessels were laid up in the shelter of Isle Royale with a load of grain on each. All four ships were trapped in ice at the St. Mary's River, having to be retrieved by 2 tugs from the Great Lakes Towing Company. They were the last 4 vessels to pass through the Channel locks in the 1924 season. The Kamloops would start her second season in April of 1925, clearing Sault Ste. Marie on the 20th at 3:30 upbound and passing through again downbound on the 23rd. In October, the Kamloops would be held up with 10 other grain fleet vessels during the grounding of the W.H. Daniels in Welland Canal Aqueduct, but otherwise had an uneventful season. When the 1926 season rolled around, the Kamloops underwent new ownership. On October the 11th, Canada Steamship Lines would buy the freighter from Steamships Limited. On October 28, 1926, the registry listed a mortgage for the Kamloops dated October 19th for $50 million, an unlikely amount, loaned at 6% interest by the Montreal Trust Company. On May 3rd, the Kamloops would begin its third season, clearing Detroit at 3 a.m., ending its third season like its first by getting stuck in ice. This time, it wasn't 4 vessels that were stuck, but 100. All the ships were caught in a channel near Nebish Island on December 3rd, the same location where the Kamloops was trapped in her first season. It was considered the largest ice jam in the history of the upper lake shipping, halting all progress of the steamers. Even the most powerful tugs could only make slow headway through the slush that rose up to 12 feet thick. To complicate the problem, there were 2,000 people aboard the jammed ships, running short of supplies. On the list of vessels freed from the ice on December 10th that was published in the Detroit Free Press, the Kamloops was not mentioned, most likely having been released on the 11th after being trapped in the ice for 9 days. This would conclude the 1926 season for the Kamloops. The final voyage of the Kamloops would be the last trip of the 1927 season. The freighter would clear Port Colborne, Ontario, upbound on December 1st, 9:30, passing Detroit 2 hours later. Kamloops would then pass through the Sioux in company of the Kodak, a 345-foot bulk freighter. While passing through Sault Ste. Marie, Captain Bryan wrote his wife in Toronto, remarking about the bad weather, and he was planning to anchor his ship. Mrs. Bryan expected her husband home on December the 10th. The giant freeze-up was still fresh on the minds of the crew. The 1927 season draw to a close. A rumor had circulated in Buffalo, New York, that the lake ships would end their season on November the 30th, but Canada Steamship Line's executives denied the rumor. The day following their statement, a 36-mile-an-hour northeast wind began, causing the upbound vessels to shelter overnight at Whitefish Point in the Welcome Islands. The temperature was 8 degrees Fahrenheit at Duluth, 10 degrees Fahrenheit at Port Arthur. Storm warnings were also raised in the Sioux. Temperatures continued to drop as a massive cold front advanced from the northwest, followed by an even worse storm. The storm intensified as the second front arrived, sweeping Lake Superior on December the 5th. Upbound vessels, including the Kamloops, have been delayed and anchored at Whitefish Bay. The downbound grain fleet weathered the storm at Fort William. Valcartier became the first ship to reach the Sioux, arriving heavily laden with ice and reporting temperatures of 40 below zero Fahrenheit during the storm. The storm grew worse on the 7th and the 8th, and by the 9th, damage reports were filtering in. Five vessels were officially underwritten as total losses that week, including the Kamloops. On the 12th, the Kamloops was declared overdue at Fort William. A search was conducted the same day in earnest for the Kamloops, led by A.E. Fader of the Islet Prince. Joining the search from the Sioux would be the government tugboat Murray Stewart. Speculations on the whereabouts of the Kamloops centered around Isle Royale. Captain R. Simpson of the Quedagh would report the following on December 13th, 1927.
The Quedagh passed upbound December 4th. Beside her was the Kamloops, upbound loaded with package freight, with 21 men aboard and captained by William Bryan. The Quedagh was leading, and the Kamloops was 1/4 of a mile eastern. At 10 o'clock Tuesday night, the lookout on the steamer Quedagh suddenly saw a dark mass ahead and gave the alarm immediately. The Quedagh turned sharply to avoid running head-on into the rocks, at the same time blowing her danger signal to the Kamloops. A north gale was blowing, there was heavy sea, and it was rough going. The visibility was poor on account of frost fog, and it is not known if the Kamloops saw the rock or heard the signal. The Kamloops has not been seen or heard of since. She had no wireless aboard.
As time passed, with no sign of the wreckage and hope reluctantly abandoned, the general feeling was that the disappearance of the Kamloops would be a Great Lakes mystery. The Coast Guard ended the search of the Keweenaw due to oncoming ice and heavy seas, recommending the search concentrated its efforts on Isle Royale and Manitou Island. The Islet Prince was called back to port after reporting no wreckage to CSL officials. Isle Royale and Manitou Island were considered the last shreds of hope for the search crew. Captain Henry Gale, the tug chaplain, believed every bay of Isle Royale should be searched.
I would like to give the isle the once-over to be certain.
It might be that some member or members of the crew got ashore and are wandering about the island. It must be made certain that no one on the island before the search for the missing steamer has given up as hopeless.
Captain Gale's thoughts about the survivors in the Isle Royale were shared by other tug captains, including Sam Wright. Wright claimed that every tug captain, mate, and engineer were prepared to search close to the shores of the isle, along with the surrounding waters and islands, including Port Arthur and the Big Island. Wright himself believed that survivors would be found on the ship ice-locked between Isle Royale's Washington Harbor and the Gull Rocks, which stretched for 15 miles and offered no shelter for ships. Another theory he had was the freighter would be in numerous bays or island-sheltered nooks from Gull Rocks to the outer point of Royale. The possibility of finding survivors alive was still believed to be remote. In 1928, little mention of the loss of the Kamloops was made, and it was considered lost in January of that year by the Ontario Workmen's Compensation Board so that widows and children of the crew could receive compensation. It was known that there were two stewardesses aboard the Kamloops, Jeanette Grafton and Alice Bettridge. The former was set to retire, and the latter was set to take her place next season. On May 26, the fishermen of Isle Royale had discovered two bodies believed to have belonged to the crew of the Kamloops. The cutter Crawford put off going into dry dock for repairs to investigate. David Lind reported, "The bodies, both wearing life preservers, with Kamloops stenciled on them. They were reported located near 12 o'clock point on Amagold Island, on the shore of Isle Royale. They were found along with wreckage of the lost steamer, fragments of superstructure, along with the top of the wheelhouse, a spar with a flag which was printed Kamloops, and a lifeboat were found in the area between Green Isle and Hawk Island." Captain Christensen stated that the wreckage includes all the boat's hatches, half a lifeboat, and 5 or 6 pairs of oars. The beach is covered with medicine, candy, toothpaste, and foodstuff carried by the steamer. The reason the steamer was not found until Saturday was because ice on the little bays is just beginning to melt. Indications are that the steamer Kamloops cannot be very far from Isle Royale. 6 more bodies would be found by June 4th by local fishermen. News of the discoveries would be relayed to the port cities from Isle Royale by the captain of the Winya. The bodies were decomposed, but one appeared to be of a woman. Initially, it was thought to be Janet Grafton. The body was later found to be that of Alice Bettridge, given she still had her natural teeth at the time. The bodies that were found were occupants of a lifeboat that had made it to shore, all wearing life belts. A 9th body could be found inland some distance from the shore, believed to be that of Henry Genst, the first mate. The body had no life belt, though one was found a short distance away. It was surmised the first mate made it ashore and removed the life belt before succumbing to the elements. On December 28th, a message in a bottle would be found by a trapper working at the mouth of the Agua River, furthering the belief Alice initially survived.
"I am the last one left alive, freezing and starving to death on Isle Royale in Lake Superior. I just want Mom and Dad to know my fate."
For almost 50 years, the Kamloops would be believed to be a ghost ship off the Great Lakes until she was rediscovered on August 21st, 1977, just northwest of Isle Royale, near what is now known as Kamloops Point. 2 sport drivers, Ken Engelbrecht from Minneapolis and Randy Saltier from Mounds View, had spotted the shadow of the Kamloops during an exploratory dive at 12 o'clock point, carrying out a systematic search at the direction of Captain Roy Oberg of the Voyager 2. Oberg himself had made a fathom meter tracing several years earlier that there was a wreck at the bottom of Lake Superior lying on its side. The wreck itself was found on the second day of the search while diving off Ken Merriman's boat, Hey Boy. with bits of cargo found in between earlier dives, such as a brass barrel and a ladder, as well as enough pipe to fit a semi-truck. On the last dive, Engelbrecht reported at a depth of 195 feet the wreck of the Kamloops. I saw this really big shadow, the Kamloops, and this other shadow that was coming out of it, which was next to the flagpole. I got a really big rush and started trucking over there. The next dives were done September 5th, 1977, as there were doubts of the wreck being the Kamloops. The real proof, Merriman said, was after the second dive with the photographs, which showed the ship's name peeking out through the year's worth of accumulated rust and debris on the stern. Katie Shute of Anchor News would later report,
Later dives by those and other divers add to what is known of the last moments of the Kamloops. A party led by John Steele filmed the wreck in 1978. This expedition discovered that the engine telegraph was set at the finish with engines position, indicating the engines may not have been operational at the time of sinking, or the vessel was laid to before the disaster.
Steele's party made the following assumption, according to observations.
In the position of her last sighting and in the raging storm, a guy wire attached to the port side of the Kamloops' stack either snapped or tore free. The stack, no longer secured, positioned only by gravity, toppled to the starboard side, shearing off the ventilators and crashing overboard, breaking through the starboard railing atop the stern cabin. This coal-fired, forced draft engine could not function without the stack. The crew was forced to finish the engines. If there had been power available, they would have been put on standby, not finished with engines. Kamloops' power plant was shut down before she sank. With no power, she was at the mercy of the raging storm, and the northeast gales tossed and blew her towards Isle Royale. She hit Isle Royale broadside, smashing her starboard bow. Temporarily, she remained fixed on the reef. Quickly taking on the water, she rapidly sank, bow first, to rest at the foot of the reef. The crew probably thought themselves safer aboard rather than facing the icy seas and sub-zero temperatures. However, they probably hoped she would remain floundered on the reef, leaving a potential for rescue. However, the open cabin door may indicate a hasty departure of the crew members as they realize their doom. The 12 other crew members probably remain trapped in the stern house, yet to be open.
Upon subsequent dives, there were other bodies found to have been trapped on board the ship, the most well-known being that of Old Whitey, or Grandpa. Old Whitey was found in the engine's boiler room after divers had noted an unseen force seemed to push them towards the area in the current of their flippers. The divers believed the unknown crew member was following them as they explored the ship. Others believed the ghost of that crew member appeared in the engine room's halls. Still, we must respect the fact that this is a gravesite for the remaining 12 crew members in the Kamloops, despite the fact none of the surviving family members have made the claim to the Kamloops as a registered gravesite like the Big Fitz. These people with real lives and had a tragic end to them. Thus, we can encourage most diving to be left to the professionals. We hope you enjoyed our tale on the Kamloops. If you liked what you heard, please like and subscribe to the Macabre Tavern. And may the fair winds guide you through dangerous times.